Good morning, and welcome to Cape Cod Broadcasting Media's third annual State of the Cape in partnership with Cape Cod Community Media Center. I'm Matt Pitt, a news director with Cape Cod Broadcasting. Pleasure for you to be here with us again for our third annual event. We have a very informative forum for you here today as we broadcast live across Cape Cod on channels 98 and 99, and of course across capecod.com and YouTube as well. So thanks for being with us here today. We have our entire Cape and Islands legislative delegation on hand to talk about the issues that are facing all of us here on the Cape and the Islands. We're going to start out with our welcome from our CCB Media owner, Gregory Bone. Greg, would you please come up?
Thank you, Matt. And welcome to our third, I'm repeating myself here, but to our third State of the Cape. I want to extend a warm welcome to our legislative delegation for joining us. And I think we'll all agree we're very fortunate that we have legislators who basically may have different views on issues, but work together and respect each other and find solutions that work for Cape Cod. And I want to thank everyone from the Cape Cod Media Center. Terry, it's great. You have us again. You do a wonderful job. We have with us today Cape Cod, the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, who is a charter underwriter for the third year. And we also have, not with us today, but we have excuse me, Dowling & O'Neill Insurance, and they're underwriter for the second year. And both companies are very active in supporting the Cape community, and we very much appreciate their underwriting support today. A couple words about Cape Cod Broadcasting Media. We are locally owned. We're committed to serving our community, and our people are very passionate about what they do and where we live. Now I want to introduce Christina Bologna from the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, Marketing Officer.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Big thank you to CCB Media for putting on this event. It's a very important event, where we get a chance to hear from our senator and representatives on the state of the Cape, all the things that are affecting our small sandbar and the islands as well. I'd also like to thank Cape Cod Community Media Center for hosting this for the last several years, and for enabling us to show it to not just the people who are able to attend this morning, but across the Cape on Channel 99 and then on social media as well. So if you're not able to join us this morning, please tune in and watch it live with us. Again, thank you so much for coming. The Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, we've been around for almost 100 years, and we're so excited to be a part of the community. It's very important for us to support the community where we all live and work, and to be able to offer you the same products and services that the big banks do, but with the knowledge that all of our resources are being recycled back into the community. It's very important to us. And we share a lot of the same mission as CCB Media, which is why it's such a great partnership. So I'd like to thank you all again. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt, and enjoy.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Greg. Okay, so I'm going to make just a kind of a quick game time decision here for our delegation, because we got just a slight bit of a late start, and I know we all have different events, so I'm going to kind of forego our initial openings here today. And what I'd like you to do as we go through, you can integrate in, if you'd like to, some of your answers about other areas that you want to talk about. I want to get right into some of the issues that are going on here in the Cape. We're going to introduce our delegation. I'm standing here to my far right. Is that left on TV? I'm not sure. I'm on the TV. Maybe on the left. Is First Barnstable State Representative Tim Whalen. Tim, thanks for being here today.
It's not a word usually associated with me, Matt, but yes, I'm on the television's left.
Thank you. Third Barnstable State Representative David Vieira. David, thank you for being here today. Fourth Barnstable State Representative Sarah Peak. Thank you. Barnstable Dukes Nantucket State Rep Dylan Fernandez. Dylan, thank you for being here today. Cape and Island State Senator Julian Sear. Thank you, Julian. And Second Barnstable State Representative Will Crocker. Will, thanks for being here. And Plymouth Barnstable State Rep Vinny DiMacedo. Vinny, thanks for being here today. Again, thank you to putting together our entire Cape and Islands delegation. Oh, yes, Randy. I forgot about, we didn't see Randy. Thank you for reminding me. Randy Hunt, our 5th Barnstable State Rep, is with us via Skype. Hi, Randy. We almost forgot about Randy. Thank you, Randy. You look good, though, there on Skype. We appreciate it. And really, we appreciate putting the whole delegation together in one place. It is difficult to put everyone's schedules together, and I do very much thank you for making the time to be here today. So let's jump into some of the issues, and we'll start out going through some of what I believe the top issues are here on the Cape, and I want to find out from you folks what we're doing, working on a couple of issues. I want to start out this year with workforce development. I've found that over the past couple of weeks, this is just a huge issue. I cannot find any business owner on the Cape right now that cannot find employees. Many are really worrying what's going to happen this summer when it comes to their business. In fact, last week we spoke with Mac Hay, who had just recently purchased Chatham Fish and Lobster. And during my interview with Mac, he said, to be honest with you, Matt, he said, in terms of business development and expansion, I don't think I can expand anymore in the Outer Cape. I cannot find workers, and all of his future workforce improvement or development is going to take place outside of the Outer Cape. He just can't find workers. So let's talk about that, about what we can do, what's happening on Beacon Hill with this issue. I'll start with you, Sarah, Representative Peake. You represent, obviously, the Outer Cape from the state rep. So talk to me just for a minute or so about what's happening with that issue with workforce development.
Yeah, sure, Matt. It's a hard and complex issue to encapsulate in a minute or so, because intertwined in workforce development are principles around education, affordable housing, the viability of a year-round versus a seasonal economy, how we support the existing seasonal businesses, and the federal issue of the tightening of both the J-1 visa program as well as the H-2B visa program. And while it's a pleasure to be here with all of my colleagues from the state legislative delegation from the Cape and Islands, the H-2B visa question is really a federal issue. And while all of us have weighed in with the governor, the Massachusetts Secretary of Labor, worked collaboratively with our local chambers and the Cape Cod Chamber to use our bully pulpit as effectively as we can to help raise that H-2B visa cap. I know employers like Mac, who's a good friend of mine. I'm a good customer of his. I bought a lot of fish at his various fish markets. They rely heavily on that visa program, and the Lobster Pot restaurant in Provincetown as well. You name businesses going up and down Route 6 on the outer part of the Cape. And guess what? American jobs rely on those special visa people being here. So what we're seeing is businesses having to be open 5 days instead of 7 days a week. That affects the income of everybody who works there, whether they're American or foreign born. Just to touch on what we are doing in the state, on housing, a number of things. Senator Sear was instrumental in getting some state-owned land in Truro transferred to the town of Truro, where affordable housing can be built. I'm part of what I refer to as a gang of 5 who's working on housing and zoning legislation that we're getting ready to bring forward to the floor. The governor filed a really great bill with his Housing Choices Bill. We need to tweak it, though, to make sure that rural communities like those on the Outer Cape still can qualify for some of the robust grant funding that's baked into that bill. So, you know, we're working on things on any number of levels. We've supported the Regional Tourism Council, our Cape Cod Chamber, more robustly this year in both the House and the Senate budget than it's ever been supported before, including language that mandates that the administration release those funds in a timely manner at the beginning of the fiscal year so that they can be invested wisely by the Regional Tourism Councils on Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. And I'm sure that's more than a minute, and these guys all have a lot to say, so I'll turn it over to them.
Representative Vieira, on this issue, as Representative Peake pointed out, it is more than just, you know, the workforce development issue really gets tied in with housing, et cetera. So from your office and your standpoint, what are you working on when it comes to this?
So we recently passed, I'm on the bonding committee, the ranking member of the House Bonding Committee, the House Housing Bonding Bill to infuse some funds into affordable housing, but also working in collaboration with the governor's office on the Housing Choice Bill. The H-2B visa issue is very important, as Representative Peake just mentioned, and the governor's office, as many of you may know, the governor has an office in Washington, D.C., and through conversations a few months ago that we had with the Cape Cod Cod Chamber of Commerce, and particularly working with Bill Zammer, who's a business owner in the Mid-Cape and Upper Cape from Mashpee. Bill has been advising the governor's office on the policies and the impacts of the cap, and working through the governor's office in Washington, D.C. to lobby the administration, because there's discretion on that cap within the Department of Homeland Security. So while there has been exemptions in the past for individuals that were under the cap in previous years, they didn't want to allow the exemption. And then most recently, there's an application process for emergency situations where there were industries that had proven so adamantly that they were in emergency situations with their workforce, that the Secretary of Homeland Security is now allowed to make some adjustments to exemptions to the cap. So we need to continue to work on that. We need to bring to the end run the Housing Choice Bill before the end of this session, so that we can focus on the affordable housing issue in the region as well.
Thank you, Representative Veer. Representative Whalen, same issue for you, what your office has been working on and how we can deal with this issue.
I'll give you my greatest endeavor to keep it to 60 seconds.
Thank you.
I think going forward, just to complement what my dear colleagues had mentioned, the answer going forward, I believe, without question, is affordable housing. We have to keep our young people here on the Cape. I keep referring to, back in my Irish heritage, Cape Cod suffering its own diaspora, where our greatest export to the rest of the state, the rest of the Commonwealth, is our young. My daughters live over the bridge. I have a daughter that lives in East Boston. I have a daughter that lives in Clinton, recently moved. We need to keep our young here on Cape Cod, and how are we going to do that? We have to provide them affordable housing options. In my district, I'm very proud that there are some affordable housing projects that are going on right now between Barnstable, Yarmouth, Dennis, and Brewster is even getting into the game now too. This is going to be critical because people just flat out can't afford to live here, and it's one of the common issues that comes up in my office that we hear is people suffering problems with their housing. The other thing that we have to really look at going forward is not just the seasonal businesses, getting them the employees that they need, but we also have to diversify our workforce, and we have to diversify industry here on the Cape. I know that we're looking at right now in my district in the industrial park in Hyannis, which, believe it or not, is right on the edge of my district. We're looking at the possibility of putting in a manufacturing plant there to potentially build homes. They're going to do pre-manufactured homes. And again, it's very much in the concept phase right now. But this is an example here where we can take a business that could employ over 100 people. We could use locally grown talent through our vocational educational programs that we have here, the great programs through Upper Cape Voc Tech and through Cape Cod Voc Tech, and provide these folks with affordable housing and keep them here on the Cape. But again, like I said, I really believe that we have to look at diversifying our industry, bringing new employers down here, and providing for the affordable housing. And that's been a priority in my office, as well as I know all of my colleagues' offices. We see what the problem is, and please trust me, we're doing everything in our power to work on it.
Thank you, Representative Whalen. Representative Fernandez, to you. You represent the Upper Cape and the islands. And I know there's acute issues when it comes to this issue about the seasonal help on the islands as well.
Yeah, thanks for the question. When you think about my district, which is half of Falmouth, all of Martha's Vineyard, all of Nantucket, the issue of affordable housing is especially profound. On Nantucket, the average home price is over $2.4 million. On the Vineyard, it's hovering around $1 million, and in my half of Falmouth, just right under $1 million. And so, how can a workforce afford to live in a place where those housing prices are that extreme? It's just impossible. And on Nantucket and on the Vineyard, these places are having problems maintaining doctors. Doctors are having a hard time finding a place to live. So how can your average worker find a place to live if doctors are struggling? So there's a couple of solutions that we've put forward. One is an affordable housing bank. This is legislation that I've filed. Senator Sears is a part of it as well. For Nantucket, it's a transaction fee on home sales over $2 million. So the first $2 million of that transaction fee is exempt. Anything over $2 million, a 0.5% fee would go towards an affordable housing bank. This would allow the local community to create affordable housing on their own terms and avoid a lot of the, well, and potentially avoid a lot of the 40B projects that locals often object to. And so this would allow for locals to be able to control their own affordable housing destiny. I think that's really important. The bill is in third reading currently, and we're looking forward to keep pushing for it. And we're going to have a forum this summer or early fall on the Vineyard about having a similar housing bank legislation for that island as well. Senator Sear and I both filed a first-time homebuyers savings account bill. One of the largest impediments to owning your first home is putting down that huge down payment. And on the Cape and Islands, that's like that's like a $60,000, $80,000 down payment to be able to get 20% down. And you got to put 20% down. I mean, you don't have to, but you should put 20% down because then you have lower interest rates. You avoid mortgage tax, which is basically a payout to large financial institutions with nothing in return. And so this is something that we're looking at as a way to allow young people to get a foothold in the door.
Thank you, Representative Fernandez. Senator Sear, I know your family and yourself previously in the restaurant business. I'm sure you had those challenges. It's even more now trying to find that help.
Yeah, my family and I lived this with the, what we then thought was the H-2B crisis. Part of the reason why, my family decided to get out of the business after 28 years was just my dad was so sick of having to be behind the kitchen, every night, every morning, flipping those eggs. And they, and this is a challenge that, yes, for seasonal workers, but also if you look at other aspects of our economy, which are really big parts of our economy here, healthcare. This morning, actually, the Association of Skilled Nursing Facilities, I was at their conference, their meeting at Ocean's Edge. Their number one challenge here is workforce, right? Is getting, being able to recruit nurses and assistants. So, I think, one, we've got to look at, workforce development, particularly for where our needs are. I think the Cape Tech project that this delegation, particularly Sarah Peak, really was able to lead on, bringing in over an additional $5 million for taxpayers to reduce those costs. That's going to help. I think, though, that the biggest impediment in what's changed, and we've all talked about this, is housing affordability. Not just capital A affordable housing projects that we need to continue, but really for housing for people who make 80% to 150, 60, 70% of area median income. We're going to hopefully be taking up this housing production zoning reform bill. That's going to help. But what we also need to really do is raise up local efforts because, frankly, when it comes to housing production, there is only so much we can do at the state level. These are decisions that are made town by town. The planning boards, the zoning boards of appeals, who sits on those boards is critically important. We need to be organized, and we need to be organized politically and push and really confront the persistent NIMBYism that we're seeing. People really, we need to really raise up that if we want to have a vibrant community going forward, we need to build housing. We need to build more in our existing downtowns. One of the biggest things that's actually going to help on that, and it's going to help workforce, is sewering and wastewater. And this delegation has led the way in a unified front to secure over $1 billion in state resources for this. We'll talk about this a little later. But really having the ability for us to meet the 208 plan that the Cape Cod Commission and others have charted here really is around us addressing our wastewater concerns. If you got a solution for wastewater, you can actually build more densely in our existing in our existing downtown. So, it's odd to answer a question about workforce with an answer about wastewater, but really these are really interwoven and really tied together, and we need to do a much better job making sure that all people can make a life in these places, not just those who have obscene amounts of wealth.
And they really are all connected. Representative Crocker, on the same question. In fact, I spoke with a business owner in your district just a couple of days ago who said he has a restaurant. He said, I'm probably not even going to open up certain sections of the restaurant this summer. I just don't have people to help. So from your office, so what would you like to see happen?
Well, it's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult situation. One of the things that I've noticed every morning as I go off Cape is that when I leave the Cape to head up to Boston, and I usually leave around between 6 and 6:30, as I'm headed down Route 6, particularly in like the Bourne Sandwich area, as I'm headed off Cape, you look the other direction, and you look at the number of cars that are coming on Cape. And if you're talking about a cloudy day in February, you see all these same cars. They're not coming here for golf. They're not coming here for staying at a hotel. They're coming here to work. The problem is workforce. Obviously, we don't have enough housing to be able to get these people can work here, but they just don't have the ability to buy or even rent housing here. So in that respect, I look forward to some of the initiatives that are happening in the town of Barnstable, specifically in the Captain's Row area in Hyannis, where they're going to take an area that's probably has not seen a lot of good times in the last couple of in the last decade or so, and it's fallen into disrepair. And we're going to take those buildings that were there now and transform that area into an area where we will have what I not like to call affordable housing. I call it sustainable housing, because these people will be there when this project is built. They'll be able to sustain the economy simply by living there and working there and shopping there, and their whole livelihood is in the Hyannis Barnstable area. So that is where we need the help. One of the areas is of course, housing. The other area, I think Representative Peake kind of touched on it, and Representative Whalen too, is technology. We need to be able to teach and educate our people who grow up here, our young people who grow up here, and may go away to college, when they finish with their college education, to come back here and work here. And part of that will be areas like Cape Cod Community College. Very happy to see that the $41 million science building at Cape Cod Community College is moving forward. I can tell you that when I went there as a student in the mid-1970s, that same science building that was there in 1976 is the same building that sits there today. So there is a very important need to be able to upgrade that, to be able to teach our kids here the skills that they need to be able to stay here and get those affordable housing projects like the one in Hyannis built, so when they've been educated, they can stay here and be part of the life economy here.
Thank you, Representative Crocker. Senator DiMacedo, please.
Thank you. And as you can see, this is clearly a multifaceted problem. One of our greatest advantages is the fact that we live in one of the most beautiful places in the nation. And because of that, people come, and especially in the summertime, our populations swell, and there's clearly a need for workforce to address and deal with all of this, all of these people that come here. And it's challenging, as you shared, and I think we all saw this pretty directly when the bridges were closed down to one lane, and it became so evident, the thing that you speak of, Will, in regards to people coming on the Cape. So the traffic problem was coming on in the morning and then leaving at night, and that really explained, and that's in the wintertime, explained the challenge that we face. The H-2B visas, things, and I always mix up that. But it is that's an issue. Water, which we're trying to work on and are trying to address to help build the infrastructure so that we can build more dense populations. All of this stuff, I think we've tried to work on a little bit at a time. It's never going to be an easy problem to solve, though, but because I think one thing that we're now dealing with legislatively is the issue of Airbnb. And the reality is that even now more than ever, we're going to see more individuals taking their homes and possibly, renting them out because there's value. Certainly in the summertime, they'll go on vacation, they'll rent their homes. That's going to make those properties more valuable. And of course, for those of us who own homes, that's a great thing. But if you don't, it becomes very difficult as a young person trying to make a go of it. So we're not solving this problem, but we are chipping away little by little and trying to address the many ways in which it affects us. And I wish there was a silver bullet to deal with this, but it is one of the, as I shared, this is such an amazing place to be that so many people want to be here in the summertime, and the people that we need to service such a broad variety of things that we do here in the summertime makes it very hard for those individuals to survive here.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Hunt is joining us via Skype today. Randy, thank you so much. Your thoughts on this issue as well?
Question about workforce development is actually about lots of different things. It's about housing, it's about workforce development, it's about infrastructure, and what we're trying to wrestle is some big projects relative to infrastructure. one of those being water, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But one of the others that I've been working with personally very closely with the county as well as Open Cape is trying to figure out how we can get better internet infrastructure in place, because some of these people who are having to go and work off Cape could actually do that work on Cape if they had enough of a pipeline to be able to do that. And also, if we had that big pipeline as far as the internet goes, would also provide infrastructure that's needed by a lot of businesses that could open here on the Cape and do back office operations as well as engineering operations. I mean, what engineer wouldn't love to wake up on Saturday morning already living on the Cape, but be able to do their job in pushing massive files back and forth with a headquarters office and still be here at the same time? We've worked with Christy Senatori at the Cape Cod Commission. They're very dedicated to making sure that we do a lot relative to internet infrastructure going forward, including perhaps having a rule set up that all new accommodations for residential housing come with it a pre-wiring for fiber optic cable. Those types of things, it's a little piece of what we're talking about here, but I think it's something that could be very important to get higher paying jobs onto Cape Cod.
Randy, thank you, Representative Hunt. I want to move over to an issue I think all of us were very much taken aback by what happened in March with our string of nor'easters, and it has led to the issue of coastal resiliency. And I know that the state's been talking a lot about it. The governor recently was sent some money down, and it's affecting all of our districts, and it's really going to affect all of us in many ways. Senator Sear, I'll start with you because I know later on today you're going to be over at Blish Point talking about that very issue, about how there's issues with Marispin Creek and residents there saying we need some help. So from the state level, what's happening with the delegation on this issue?
I think residents across the entire district that I represent and we represent, have seen really unprecedented levels of impact, and we're seeing the impact of a changing climate. So there's a number of things we're doing, both from the broad to the more narrow around resiliency. More broadly, the Senate next week is going to be taking up a bill related to climate change and to really making sure that Massachusetts continues to really be a leader on that. I think it's actually something that we weren't sure if the House would take it up, but there might be some appetite now increasingly to do that. Dylan actually here led the charge on the House side to make sure that Massachusetts was tied to the Paris climate change agreements. So broadly, we're needing to sort of keep that up. More specifically, from a resiliency and planning perspective, the governor filed an environmental bond bill that is now working its way through the House. Representative Vieira and others have had a hand in that. It'll come over to the Senate. I suspect that in this bond, there should be a disproportionate amount of resources for us here along the coast because we've seen a whole host of challenges. I think also it's really important that the state begin to provide the 351 communities and cities and towns we have in the Commonwealth with resources around having to plan for the future. And to be quite frank, right, there are some places that we've built or roads that we have, right, that we're not necessarily going to win that battle over a rising tide. But I think we need to make sure that our communities have resources, and from a planning perspective, can really have a conversation about, what do we do? Are there, yes, there's hardening pieces we can take, which we do much more out here as we do beach nourishment and other kind of more environmentally sensitive interventions. There's also projects like the Herring River restoration in Wellfleet as well, all about sort of building resiliency here. But I think there's a part of this as well that we've got to be honest that, the way that we've made life here on the Cape and Islands for the last several hundred years, there's stuff that's also going to have to change too. And I think we need to be honest about that. And what you see in this climate resiliency bond bill is steps being taken for the Commonwealth to begin to have what are pretty tough conversations.
Thank you, Senator Sear. Representative Hunt, I'm going to go back to you specifically. The town of Sandwich, which you represent, has been in a race every year to try to save Town Neck Beach, and you're really at the forefront in that district with this issue of coastal resiliency. From your office's standpoint, what can you do? What are you planning to do to work with the state to try to shore up basically our shoreline?
We have a unique situation in Sandwich because our beach, Town Neck Beach specifically, is in the shadow of the jetty of the Cape Cod Canal. And that means that the sand that normally would be coming into the system is blocked off. So we see some severe results from that. The good news is that we put in we put in a multi-million-dollar project a few years ago, $1 million of that money coming from the state, to put in new sand and plant beach grass. And even in these giant storms that completely covered the dunes out there, those dunes that we had put in with the beach grass growing held pretty well. So that's a good sign for us. But one of the things that is to be completed soon by the Army Corps of Engineers is a study about the impacts of that canal jetty on the beaches in Sandwich and further out to the east, and being able to figure out what to do about that in the long term and what share the U.S. government is going to take and what share the state and the local community are going to have to take to be able to keep that harbor marsh from returning to its state as just an open harbor someday.
Thank you, Representative Hunt. Senator DiMacedo, on the issue of coastal resiliency, what your office may be working on this issue?
And again, it's been brought up, but we're really excited about the environmental bond bill that's coming forth, and a large part of that has been because of of what we've seen in regards to the coastal resiliency issue. I don't think any of us weren't moved by what happened here in March, storm after storm, and then seeing the implications of what that did. Things that I have never seen, and I've lived in this area virtually all my life, and to see areas, the devastation that has happened from these storms. And so we are trying to address that from a standpoint where we get the resources in place to be able to address the resiliency issue. It's clearly significant for all of us, and of course for the Cape. We get it on both sides and the impact and the challenges of that. But I think in the short answer, that's the best way I think that we're going to try to address what's happening. The challenges is some of the broader issues that I know Dylan's been working hard on in regards to on a more international level are somewhat out of our control. What can we do at a local level is trying to protect our coastlines. That's something that myself and I feel, this entire delegation, and I feel very confident that the administration is very supportive as well. In light of immediately after those storms, one of the first things they did was put forth this environmental bond bill to have this conversation.
Thank you, Senator DiMacedo. Representative Crocker, on this issue, we saw tremendous flooding up on the north side and portions of your district as well. What's your office working on this?
Well, we were very lucky to be able to get into the budget $50,000 to be able to help out the town of Barnstable with regard to Blish Point, a little further down the street, with regard to planting beach grass and re-nourishing that beach area down there, so that, as we saw with the storm after storm after storm, we are continually being impacted by that at levels that we have never seen before. My family has lived in the village of Barnstable for over 200 years, and I can tell you that growing up in that particular area, we never saw any of this happen before. So we need to be moving. We need to be moving ahead of the curve, so to speak, with regard to infrastructure and planning our infrastructure, our particular needs to the changing climate that we're having here. I mean, you can remember the pictures of the gatehouse at Sandy Neck after the storms. The water at the gatehouse at Sandy Neck was halfway up the building. So we need to start thinking that these could possibly be, annual, if not annual, very commonplace occurrences that are going to be happening. So we need to plan with regard to our structures, with regard to our roads, with regard to any of those things for a change in climate. And doing that, very happy to hear, be part of the program to see that both towns in my district, Barnstable and Yarmouth, will be getting MVP grants, which were Municipal Vulnerability Program grants, to be able to start the planning process to when these situations start to present themselves, and they are, to be able to plan for their infrastructure to meet the challenges of the changing climate.
Thank you, Representative Crocker. Representative Fernandez, please.
Thanks, Matt. as a millennial, there's no issue that's going to impact my generation or my children's generation more than that of climate change and rising sea level, period. But at the end of the day, Massachusetts could get to 100% renewable energy tonight, and we're still going to see somewhere between 2 to 8 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. And so how do we plan for that? And as someone who represents probably more coastline than any other person in the House of Representatives, and probably many people across the country, this is a really serious issue for the districts, a really serious issue for the Cape and Islands, and frankly, really hard, tough decisions are going to be made because a lot of places that we love on the Cape and Islands will not be here in my lifetime. And so this is why it's really important that we establish a comprehensive coastal adaptation management plan that doesn't look a couple of years in the future or even a couple of decades in the future, but looks 50, 60 years in the future, because it makes no sense for our local communities and the state government to be spending, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to, shore up places that will be there for the next 10, 20 years, but in 30, 40 years from now are just going to be completely underwater. So I was part of Falmouth's municipal vulnerability plan, and we did a comprehensive look at all the areas in Falmouth that are projected to be under seawater, how that's going to affect our transportation, how that's going to affect our businesses, how it's going to affect public safety and response to crises. And this is an issue that's going to keep getting worse. We've had 3, 100-year storms in the past year, and it's only going to get worse. And our local communities and our state need to have a comprehensive plan, and we're going to have to make tough decisions on what we want to shore up and save and what, frankly, we got to let go.
Thank you, Representative Fernandez. Representative Peak, some of the video from Commercial Street and Bradford Street went viral from those storms as those roads flooded. We see the town manager from Provincetown in our live audience here today. From your office's standpoint, what will you be working on this issue?
Yeah, first, just to take a step back and kind of put this in perspective, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking over the 12 years I've served in the legislature, and Senator DiMacedo has served for more terms than that. I've spent a lot of time talking about what used to be uniquely Cape Cod issues, the lack of housing and therefore the impact on workforce, the ever-growing short-term rental market and second homeowner market, and the impact that has on our communities, and climate change and coastal erosions. In my first term in the legislature in 2007 was when the South Beach break happened in Chatham, and I put a group together there. So what's evolved over the last 12 years is on climate change. It's not just Ballston Beach or Provincetown flooding or losing half the parking lot by the Beachcomber in Wellfleet, or yet another break in the barrier beach that protects Pleasant Bay, but you have dumpsters floating down Atlantic Boulevard in the city of Boston. You have the Speaker's District of Winthrop experiencing flooding in Boston Harbor. You have the governor saying, we have to increase housing production because there aren't enough places for people to live. You have the mayor of Boston saying, we want to bring Amazon in here, but we don't have housing for them. So, and you have the representative from the North End saying, oh my goodness, Airbnb and short-term rentals are changing the character of our neighborhood. We have to address this. So, Senator DiMacedo, we finally have company in addressing these. And that's one reason, quite honestly, it is such an honor for me to work with these gentlemen that are sitting at these tables and on that monitor. And we have a pretty loud and fierce and united voice together. But boy, it's sure good to have some company from the scores of people that represent Middlesex and Suffolk County on all of this. So one of the things that's happening on climate change is we keep hearkening back to the Environmental Bond Bill. There's a bill that I'm a co-sponsor of. It's called the CAMP Bill, the Climate Adaptation Management Plan Bill. Well, Governor Baker has basically taken the core principles of the CAMP bill and put that into the Environmental Bond Bill. Key among it is to put together a commission. I'd like to see the majority and minority leaders in both houses have some appointing authority, which they currently don't, but we can tweak that as it goes through our branches, to put together an advisory commission that would draw from a broad base of constituencies to look at and develop a long-range plan, including making the tough decisions and that Representative Fernandez has talked about. And the other thing that I'd like to talk about is Although we can always do more, and we are committed to doing more, in the area of renewable energy, let's take a moment to sit back and look at Massachusetts as the leader that it is in the area of renewable energy. Just last week, it was announced that 800 megawatts of renewable wind, clean energy power is going to be coming ashore in Massachusetts, right here on the Cape, providing jobs here on the Cape, providing enough renewable energy to power each and every home here on the Cape. This is the largest wind project in the United States. This is just the first of 3 lease areas. We're ready to go on lease areas 2 and lease areas 3. This is good for the economy, it's good for the climate. So while we're looking at things on the micro level and supporting programs like these municipal vulnerability grants, by the way, Provincetown, congratulations, $27,500 for that. Most of the communities in my district were recipients of these MVP grants. We need to deal with the granular, no pun intended with our sand, but with the granular at the same time while we're looking at this from a 30,000-foot level. And the way we can do that is to make sure that we continue to be a leader in renewable resources, to reduce our carbon footprint, to unhook from fossil fuels as quickly and as effectively as we can, and do things like the state is doing, supporting research in battery storage, because that's really the next breakthrough area that we're moving forward in. So there's a lot of good stuff we're doing. Is it fast enough? We always want to do things more quickly, but you know, congratulations to us, quite honestly, for being first in the nation in this offshore wind project.
Thank you, Representative Peake. Representative Vieira, on this issue and how it may be impacting your district and what you're going to be doing.
Sure. I'd like to get back to sort of the granular, a few things that are actually happening in my district. And one is in the town of Falmouth, working along the Coonamessett River. The Coonamessett River is a watershed that had been dammed for cranberry farming years ago. But with that, it took away a bit of coastal resiliency from the East Falmouth area and the neighborhoods. And over the course of the last couple of years, since the cranberry farming has been abandoned in that area, the dam has been taken down. Phase 1 of the restoration project just completed a few weeks ago, due in large part to state grants, the types of grants that are made available through some of the line items that are in the environmental bond bill and that were in the previous version of the environmental bond bill. And so being able to look at when these large storms may hit our coastline, what have we done to armor the coastline and to change the patterns of flow of water? And so you could go up 2 miles in East Falmouth and at a large hurricane have water right in your backyard because of the way that we've changed the coastline. And so the committee that Dylan mentioned, Falmouth has a coastal resiliency committee appointed by the selectmen. They have a plan that they've issued. They've been doing updates to our town government so that folks are aware of the things that are in the phases moving forward. Projects such as that is getting ready to commence along the Childs River, another watershed within the area of the East Falmouth. When we talk about the larger picture, talk about climate change and renewable energies, I think it was most stark to be at Mass Maritime Academy with Secretary Beaton when we announced a generation of grant opportunities and tax credit opportunities around solar. When we were there on a cloudy day, we were in the shadows of the wind turbine that was not spinning that day because it wasn't windy. And yet, from Harrington Hall, we looked out the window and we had a 7-knot current running down the canal. And so as we look forward to bringing to scale hydro, tidal, kinetic energy, we want Cape Cod to be the leader in the United States. We have the first permitted tidal turbine test site in the United States, permitted by the Army Corps of Engineers, funded by a Seaport Economic Council grant, which our office worked with the Marine Environmental Renewable Collaborative. And we have a hydrokinetic turbine program at Mass Maritime Academy. And so our test turbine site, if you drive over the Bourne Bridge, look over to the railroad bridge, you will see the infrastructure that is there along the edge of the railroad bridge. The idea is to be able to have this continuum of development that can start at Mass Maritime Academy with tethered devices off of their pier and off of their vessels, and then to have longer-term deployment of those resources at the tidal test turbine site before they go into deep water. And as I told the Secretary that day, I said, you know, some days the sun shines, some days the wind blows, but the days that the tide doesn't change, we got a lot bigger problems than renewable energy. And the business model, to be able to go 12 hours and 12 hours, and to be able to plan a business model around the tides, makes it much easier for us to make these projects economically feasible. But what we need to continue to do is to invest in bringing the technology to scale, because there's no reason why the Cape Cod Canal and other watersheds and harbor areas couldn't, outside of the navigable channel, have these turbines up and down the corridor. I mean, miles of these infrastructure which have been designed not to deal with, not to interact with marine mammals and fish, and to be out of sight, out of mind, underwater, and to continue to operate. So those are just two projects that our office have been working.
Thank you, Representative Vieira. Representative Whalen, please.
Thank you, Matt. I first have to thank the Baker Polito administration and Secretary Beaton for their hard work on this particular topic, and their development of the environmental bond bill, which you've heard about maybe 20 times in the past 15 minutes. I've read through the bill, and it's exceptional. It does cover a lot of ground, and I think that ultimately it's going to be a very good tool that we can use going forward to help protect our coastline. And I'm already reaching out to my town administrators. I've reached out to county officials to see if, after their read-through, to see what sort of modifications or amendments we could make to the bill that they believe would be beneficial for each of the 4 individual towns in my district. I think that we all recognize that climate change is happening, and it's happening right before our eyes. And we would be, I believe, foolish to not take advantage of the opportunity to build a more robust green economy here, create some jobs, and also do our part to help reduce our carbon footprint going forward. It became even more apparent to me, Matt, as you were mentioning in January. Being the kind of person going back to my public safety roots, I could not stay home, and I went out, drove around, and checked on my district during the middle of the January storm. And as I drove around, I went to pretty much each of the north-facing beaches in my district, starting with Blish Point, which I'm going to be at Blish Point myself in a couple weeks as well to visit there. Starting over there in Barnstable and working my way east. And my district, when it comes to coastal erosion, it's a funny district in that it gets eaten alive during storms like this on the west end of the district. And as you go further east, you end up down at Crosby Landing Beach, and Crosby Landing Beach is probably the only beach on Cape Cod that's actually growing, because all of the sand that's scooped out of from Sandwich Town Neck ends up down in Brewster. So, Randy, Will, I want to thank you very much for the sand that's deposited down our way and expanding. Actually, at some point we'll find a way to build and tax that land that's being deposited down our way.
Isn't that my part of Brewster?
It is your part of Brewster. Thank you very much. But we share Brewster, Madam Leader.
Yeah, well, of course we do.
So we'll share the credit for that.
We'll share a piece of the beach together this summer.
So as I was driving around, we had, as you recall, during the January storms, Cape Cod was covered with ice flow. And one of the strangest calls that I got during that storm as I was riding around was Chief Koch from Brewster PD called me, said that they were closing Route 6A by Paynes Creek Beach because of flooding and because icebergs were blocking the road. And as I drove right down there and waited, I called Mass Highway to help get some equipment down there to help clear the icebergs from the middle of 6A once the water had receded. And it dawned on me at that point, I said, this is almost surreal. This is Cape Cod, and we're going to be shutting down a road, not only because of flooding, but because we have big, massive chunks of ice that came in from the bay, came up the creek, and I was watching as it was coming up against a guardrail and tipping over the guardrail and having big chunks of ice landing in the middle of the road. My friends, climate change is real. I think at our level, in addition to supporting the environmental bond bill and doing our part to build that robust green economy, probably for me the most important thing that I can do going forward and that I have been doing is reaching out and supporting my municipal officials. Nobody knows what the problems are in preserving the coastline better than those municipal officials, the selectmen and the town administrators. I speak with the town administrator in Dennis regularly about the terminal problems that we have up on the north side. I'm thinking of Dr. Botero Road in Dennis, for instance. We had Grays Beach in Yarmouth. I went up there during the storm, and for those of you that are familiar with Grays Beach in Yarmouth, the water was up to the top level of the benches, and video of that also went viral. I went to Mance Landing Beach in Brewster, and I watched just a river of water come from the bay and go across the parking lot. And as Brewsterites know, every spring we see that the town sends up the equipment to take the beach out of the parking lot and put the beach back on the beach. So we have to support our town officials. We have to find a way to get even more funding down there to support the initiatives that they know is going to be important. And the other thing, too, is also trying to clear some of the obstacles that may exist through state regulatory needs so that we can allow the towns the flexibility they need to complete those projects and keep our coastline robust.
Thank you, Representative Whalen. Before we get to our next question, I will ask, because time will be an issue, we want to keep our answers nice and tight. Brevity is always excellent in our business, so let's try it if we can. We do appreciate that. I want to move over to an issue that, unfortunately, Cape Cod and Yarmouth was forced into the national limelight when it comes to criminal justice issues after the death of Sergeant Gannon. On the issue of criminal justice reform, if you could give us just a brief answer from each of you on what you think needs to be happening, if anything, on Beacon Hill right now when it comes to the issue of criminal justice reform. Rep. Whalen, we'll start with you on that, please.
Always love being first because I have about 8 million different things cycling around in my head, and then I heard that word brevity.
60 seconds.
So 60 seconds. Let's try and keep it to that. I think that one of the things that we've been pushing for, and I'm going to keep on pushing for, I know I'm joining with the delegation on this, is demanding that our criminal justice system conduct an internal review of itself. Now, I'm not picking on the judges. I'm not picking on parole, probation. I'm talking the entire system, from law enforcement to the bar, to the judges, probation, parole, and everywhere in between, conduct an out-and-out open system review and let the public see how they operate and how they arrive at the decisions that they do. Then we need to accept input from the public and legislatively look at ways, when we solicit these ideas from the public, look at ways that we can improve what we have. We like to say that we have the best criminal justice system in the world here in the United States. That doesn't mean that we're not open to improvement. I think that when you have someone with 125 convictions on their record, in an attic in Barnstable, with a firearm in his hand, that's proof that there is a break in the system and we must fix it. We have to get the criminal justice system to open up their doors, expose their operations to the public, because sunshine is always the best disinfectant. Speaking to people across this district, we're mad as hell, and we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to demand justice, we're going to demand action, and I can guarantee you that we're going to keep pushing for that.
Thank you, Representative Whalen.
7.
Nice. Representative Vieira, please.
So we all, in horror, witnessed what happened with Sergeant Gannon. And what led up to that fateful day was an individual who had a series of convictions, who had served time at a young age in the state prison system, and had been released, and had been, within a couple of days of that incident, violated on the standards of parole. And that's why Officer Gannon, Sergeant Gannon, and his team were at the house, was to apprehend an individual to go back into the criminal justice system for violation of why they were out. The system, as Rep. Whalen said, is not perfect, but we need to continue to have these conversations and these internal investigations as to how do we perfect the system to make it better. The delegation has had a series of meetings already with the chairs of the Judiciary Committee in the House and the Senate. Most recently, we had a meeting with the head of the Chief Justice of the Trial Court, of the Superior Court, and the District Courts, and probation to discuss this issue. And one of the interesting things that we found out is when they're making these decisions around parole, the Commonwealth just recently, within the past year, began doing federal background checks on individuals who were incarcerated in the Commonwealth as a matrix of a decision to release them on parole. 10 years ago, when I worked at the Sheriff's Office, we used to do federal background checks on volunteers to work with kids at the youth ranch. And the Commonwealth is just now beginning to do these background checks on individuals that we're going to put back on the streets. So the system's not perfect. The sacrifice that Sergeant Gannon and his family made was ultimate. It was unnecessary. But that young man was doing exactly what we all expected of someone in his role, was to take someone back off the street who shouldn't be on the street. So God bless his family, God bless Sergeant Gannon, and we'll continue to push this on Beacon Hill.
Thank you, Representative Vieira. Representative Peake on this issue of criminal justice reform, please.
Yeah, thank you. My two colleagues here have spoken so eloquently on this. I mean, this was an incident that ripped apart the community, so many communities. I mean, obviously Sergeant Gannon's immediate family, the community of Yarmouth, the Cape Cod community, and when I went to the funeral mass and I parked my car in sort of a remote area of the parking lot at the church and walked over towards the church, I have never seen so many police officers and first responders anywhere ever in my life. So clearly this was an incident that ripped apart that community too. These people are always the first one to answer the call and to come when just regular old citizens like me are in our most dire need. They're there for us. So I won't reiterate what the delegation has done already in terms of our meetings with the judiciary chairs and the various people from the court systems. Those will continue. One thing that my two friends here did not talk about, an action that was taken immediately by the Senate and later followed up by the House. Shockingly, Massachusetts ranked 49th in ongoing police training. And that is inexcusable. You know, we like to always brag about being number one or worse, at least in the top 10. Well, we ranked 49th because unlike for firefighters where there is a designated fund created, all of us who have homeowners insurance, there's a surcharge that's put on every homeowner's insurance policy that goes into a designated fund to help train our firefighters and keep them safe and keep them up on the newest technology. Well, guess what? For law enforcement, for our police officers, the nature of crimes have changed, technology has changed, weapons have changed, the opioid crisis has made so many issues far more acute, from domestic violence to gun violence, you name it. But yet we did not have a designated fund, and we were not adequately funding police training in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we have instituted, it's an idea come up that was hatched by the Mass Police Chiefs Association. We will be instituting a $2 surcharge on every rental car here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's not a $2 per day. You can rent a car for 2 weeks. You pay $2 once. And we feel that, for now at least, that will allow a buildup in this fund and adequately fund training because these officers give so much to us. We owe them to give them all of the tools to keep them as safe as possible. So that's a major step forward.
Thank
as
you,
well.
Representative Peake. Representative Fernandez on this issue. Your brief answer.
I'll be brief. I just want to echo the sentiments from my colleagues on the tragedy. It was something that deeply affected the entire Cape and Islands, and I agree with my colleagues that it's something we need to shine a light on. And the Cape delegation as a whole worked really hard to push what Rep. Peake was just talking about in terms of a dedicated fund for police training. And I think that's a really positive step forward. On a separate matter, the House took up, and then so did the Senate, and it's already passed into law, a comprehensive criminal justice reform bill. The United States has the largest prison population in the history of humanity. Massachusetts, although better than a lot of the nation, is still, in my mind, kind of a disgrace internationally in terms of how many people we have in our prisons, and a lot of these people are suffering from mental health and substance misuse disorders that really, should be treated elsewhere. And so we passed a comprehensive criminal justice reform bill that tries to make our society a more equitable, fair, balanced place to live in terms of criminal justice. There's a lot of programs for diversion. It reforms solitary confinement, which I view as a form of torture, but it certainly makes changes there, makes changes to query reform, makes changes to how soon you can seal your record if you are out of prison and aren't recommitting any types of crimes, so that a mistake you made in your youth doesn't haunt you for the rest of your life and keep you jobless. So there's a lot of really good, comprehensive reforms in that criminal justice reform bill that we're going to see take effect over the coming years.
Thank you, Representative Fernandez. Senator Sear.
Just to echo the sentiments and the statements from this delegation, not only today, but really just an unimaginable, horrible tragedy in the slaying of Sergeant Gannon and how that's impacted our whole community. I think this delegation really. We're always working together, but I think really has come together on this issue and really focused on, and in the months since have focused on, all right, how do we from this horrific, wrenching episode, how do we learn, what are things that can be improved? What are things we can do better, can be fixed to help our communities heal? And we've been doing that. There's a lot more to do. Certainly the Municipal Police Training Fund that we passed first in the Senate, then the House took up. This has been the #1 priority for the Police Chiefs Association in the Commonwealth for like 8 years. And it was shocking that that wasn't done, that we were able to get that done in both chambers. Senator DiMacedo filed several provisions in the Senate budget that also provide additional protections for municipal police officers. Hopefully that'll be adopted in conference. I think other pieces that specifically need to be looked at in that lessons learned piece is what we do for victim and witness assistance. If you look at this violent criminal, you had an individual who most of the charges brought, those 125 charges, are related to spouses or girlfriends who essentially are intimidated, right, and who don't bring those charges. And so often, and in this case, in many cases, police officers know who problematic violent people are. We're not talking about nonviolent drug users, we're talking about violent criminals. But they're unable to get those charges brought because witnesses won't come and testify. They won't testify because they're afraid of abuse. And what have you. I think that's something we need to improve on. And I think we also need to look at what do we do with young adults entering our criminal justice system. Having someone who's 19 or 20 years old, who's already a pretty problematic kid, having them in a prison setting with a whole host of other hardened criminals and adults is something we should look at. I think there's actually steps in the criminal justice reform as well, looking at how do we treat these sort of juvenile, sort of 17-year-old to 26-year-olds. How are they sort of segregated in some way so that they're serving their time, but we're making sure that we're doing everything to remediate them. The criminal justice reform bill that was passed and signed by Governor Baker did a lot of really good things. That's primarily focused around nonviolent drug offenses. But I think, I'm really hopeful this delegation submitted a request to have a hearing on these issues and to really, as Rep. Whalen said, really bring some sunlight into this. And I think that I just really am grateful for this delegation, and really coming together and really honoring Sergeant Gannon's memory by making sure that we're working tangibly and productively to, God forbid, make sure this never happens again to another community.
Thank you, Senator Sear. Representative Crocker.
It was a tragedy, and it still bothers me to this day because, on a personal note, the shooting actually happened in the street over from where my parents live in Marston's Mills. So it bothers me from a personal point of view that these things, number one, happened, and number two, happened can happen to anybody. I think on a more positive note, what the Cape Cod delegation does and did with regard to this incident is listen. Many of you were probably there the night of the vigil when Chief Fredrickson from Yarmouth Police Department said, listen, what's going on here? Smarten up. Well, the Cape delegation listened, and we moved very quickly, both in the House and the Senate, to be able to, as has been reiterated previously, is to get our police training up to snuff. Yes, we were 49th in the country. That's not going to happen again. That is not going to be a problem. We are moving forward to be able to make sure that our public safety officers have the tools and the training that they need to be able to protect us and to be able to adequately perform their duties. So briefly, again, that is one thing that the Cape and Islands delegation does, is that we heard what Chief Fredrickson said, we responded, and that to our benefit, I think, and to the benefit of the people we represent, we have moved forward on making a very, very negative thing happen to have more positive outcomes.
Thank you, Representative Crocker. Senator DiMacedo.
Thank you. I think what we as a delegation tried to do at that particular juncture and after understanding, and I think all of us were just completely devastated and said, what can we do to try to make a difference? And we did it with the letter. We're trying to address the judicial system, but we've also put some legislation in place that the police chiefs and the police officers in the Commonwealth said would be helpful to them. We did the municipal training fund. We've addressed the issue of, for violent offenders on their third offense, on the fourth offense. And believe me, this seems crazy, but the reality is to send that message that it's not acceptable. We've increased the penalty beyond whatever the fourth offense would be, an extra 5 years. We've added a 10-year mandatory minimum for firing a weapon at a police officer to again make the statement that we in society will not tolerate those individuals who put those people who put their lives on the line every day for us. They run in when we are running out, and we need to, as a society, stand and tell them that we will give them all the tools necessary financially and all the support legislatively. And I think we're doing that as best we can to try to address a very, very horrible situation.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Hunt.
When we were having the discussion with the justices, chief justices, one of the things that came out among these 125 charges, and Julian alluded to this as well, is that a number of those, many of those, were for violent actions and were not prosecuted because people did not come forward to be witnesses in those cases. We need to delve into that issue and find out if there's some way to be able to protect these witnesses better, or somehow substitute the DA's office in those cases to be able to bring forward testimony. Another thing that we talked about is we don't know how this guy got a gun. Obviously, he spent 4 years in the Department of Corrections. He can't own a gun. And I think that the person that sold or gave him that gun also killed Sergeant Gannon. And I also feel that way with respect to anybody who sells or gives anyone drugs that they use an overdose from. Those people have killed somebody, and we should deal with it that way.
Representative Hunt, thank you. This is what I'd like to do for our delegation. Our time is very tight. I know all of you have events this afternoon. So in our final segment here, I'd like to have each of you just very quickly give us maybe one or two issues you're going to be working on in the remainder of this session. So we don't have to go into deep descriptions, but all of your constituents would like to know what are some of just the top issues you're going to be working on over the next several months before this session ends. So we want those in brief kind of listicle type forms. Representative Whalen, give us your one or two very quick issues we're going to see from your office.
Addiction, transportation, public education funding. Those will be the top three. We've made great progress this session, working cooperatively with my close friend, Representative Paul Tucker, a Democrat from Salem, retired chief of police. We were able to make tremendous gains in getting controls on the trafficking of fentanyl. We included carfentanil, which is now considered a Class A substance. That's the elephant tranquilizer. Previously was not controlled in Massachusetts at all, as well as any synthetic opioid that's on the federal DEA schedule is now controlled as a Class A substance. So that's going to be important. We have a lot of transportation projects in my district to include replacing the Route 28 Bass River Bridge, and education funding and regional school transportation are always, always, always going to be right up there at the top of the list.
Thank you, Representative Whalen. Representative Vieira.
So before the end of the session, I've got a number of home rule petitions that have come from the community. So shadowing through the town meeting votes into legislation from the local communities, but also, again, as the ranking member of the bonding committee, continuing to wrap up the bond bills that we have and those that are still actually to come before the committee. We hope to get that done by the end of the term, including some earmarks for renovations to the courthouses here in Barnstable County to make sure that the Orleans and Falmouth district courts are brought up to full ADA capacity, but then also to make sure that a new complex in Barnstable Village is in the third phase of the bond plan, the capital plan, because for those of you that don't know, in many cases, we take some of our female inmates and we chain them to radiators and benches in the Superior Court because of lack of room. And that is not a way to administer justice in the greatest world nation. And so we need to make sure that we invest in that and then we look at the future uses of those facilities.
Thank you, Representative Viera. Representative Peak, a couple of the quick issues we'll see from your office, please.
Yes, thank you, Matt, and thank you for bringing us together today and
Welcome.
affording us the opportunity to be here before your live audience and everybody out there who will be watching this on the various cable stations. So I alluded to before, I'm part of a group of, it's myself, the chair of the Housing Committee, the Municipalities Committee, vice chair of Ways and Means, and the chair of Community and Economic Development Committee, and I are working on some zoning reform principles and bringing forth a housing bill to increase housing production all along the scale from affordable housing to market rate housing, and to do it in a way that's in step and in keeping with the unique character of each of our 351 cities and towns. I've also been appointed to the conference committee for the short-term rental bill, the so-called Airbnb bill. And that's important because, quite honestly, if I wasn't on that conference committee, it would be a group of legislators from largely an urban area making decisions that are going to affect us and our large short-term rental market that we have here on the Cape. And our second homeowner situation here is similar, but in many ways very different to what's being faced, for example, in the North End. So I'm grateful to be on that conference committee. Another important piece is all of us who you see sitting at these tables today, about a year and a half ago, we started a series of meetings with a group of people gathered by the Cape Cod Chamber to figure out a way that we would be able to afford on the Cape the $4 billion wastewater price tag without bankrupting every homeowner on the Cape who would see their real estate taxes quadrupled or more. We think we have an affordable housing crisis now. If the cost of wastewater management were on the backs of every homeowner, we would see that affordable housing crisis go through the roof. So what we cooked up was a surcharge, a way to use other people's money, to other people who come here and flush the toilet and run the water and contribute to the problem, to use some of their money, a reasonable amount, I believe, to go into a trust, a unique Cape Cod trust, that will help underwrite the very expensive wastewater bill here on the Cape. So we're looking forward to bringing that piece and the short-term rental piece forward to fruition. And I'll join with my colleague from Falmouth. You know, a very important part of what we do is work closely with our communities, and one way that we do that is to bring these home rule bills that have been voted on by town meetings forward and get them completed, representing 8 communities, all of which are very active. I can assure you that there are a number of home rule bills that we'll need to bring forward and get done before the end of the session so that the will of town meeting voters is realized at the state level.
Thank you, Representative Peak. Representative Fernandez, your quick bullet list of what we'll see from you over the next few months.
Thanks, Matt. One of the main pieces that we're really pushing for is my bill on ocean acidification. Our oceans are rapidly acidifying. It's an effect, one of the effects of climate change and release of CO2 into our atmosphere. This has a profound effect on our shellfishing industry. If our oceans become too acidic, shellfish aren't able to form their shells. And we have a $500 million shellfishing industry in Massachusetts, and a large part of that is here on the Cape and Islands. And so we're looking to push that and some of the environmental bills that are coming up. We're also focused on substance misuse and addiction. We're going to file a safe use pilot program bill. This is a program that's been extremely effective in pretty much every Western European country, and then Canada to our north has seen a 30% reduction in opioid overdose deaths and a 25% increase in those accessing treatment in places where they have these sites. And the other part is healthcare. We're bringing up a healthcare bill in the House that the Senate has already passed. And a component of that is women's reproductive health and its implications through kind of telemedicine in the Cape and Islands, and also through having telemedicine in that bill, people in kind of the far reaches. And my communities in the Cape, we certainly have a lot of communities in the far reaches of the state being able to access healthcare.
Representative Fernandez, thank you. Senator Sear, your quick list of issues we'll see from you in the next few months.
Thank you. So many issues the Senate passed that the House is now taking up, which is great. Trying to get that first-time home buyers bill passed. this wastewater piece that Sarah talked about briefly, and we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but you're going to be hearing a lot from us. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod has called the proposal for a Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust as the most significant piece of legislation to have happened for Cape Cod in the last 20 years. I'm proud to have been a part of that in my first term. We're going to be taking up this, actually the House is going to go first on this one, and then we'll follow suit in the Senate, but the opioid bill as well I think is really important. As someone with a public health background, really want to make sure that we are really providing that continuum of care. If you look at addiction and the opioid crisis, we are seeing a reduction across the state of opioid overdose deaths. We're not seeing that here in Cape Cod, and it's a really tough issue that's going to require really sustained resources and time. Plus the housing bill, plus a flurry of other things. We're sort of it's a sprint to the finish line on July 31st. Till July 31st was the end of the session. And just if you hear all the priorities that we're talking about, these are all priorities that each of us have been involved in, and I'm just really grateful for the collaboration for my colleagues who are here in the studio and for Mr. Hunt via Skype.
Thank you, Senator Sear. Rep. Crocker, your quick list of what we'll see from your office the next few months.
Well, I'm proud to be part of the leadership and to be able to move forward with this wastewater trust fund. Obviously, if we do not have clean water, if we do not have a handhold on our wastewater situation, then we can't live here, and if we can't live here, no one's going to come here to visit in the summertime. So I'm very enthused to be part of that. What my office is going to be looking at probably in the next few months is the opiate addiction issue. I'm moving forward on a plan that is a non-tax, non-budget influenced way to fund prevention programs in schools and nonprofit agencies in the area of prevention. Right now on Cape Cod, out of every dollar that's spent on the opiate addiction issue, 1 penny out of every dollar, 1%, is spent on prevention programs. I'm looking forward to being able to, in the very near future, to be able to announce this new way to permanently fund prevention programs in our schools and nonprofits so that kids who are facing this issue now will have the education, will have the tools to be able to not go down that path, because everybody in every family knows someone nowadays who is struggling with that issue. So I'm very positive in being able to have this program that's not going to be a tax, that's not going to be a fee, that's going to be voluntary, and has proven to be successful at 34 different areas to be able to fund prevention programs in our schools and our nonprofits.
Thank you, Representative Crocker. Senator DiMacedo.
Thank you. And over the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be challenged with dealing with the $41 billion budget. I'm one of the conferees on that, trying to deal with the challenges financially, and clearly there's some significant legislation in there as well. So that's going to take up most of the time. But I think another big issue that I think we've all been working on and talking a lot about is addressing the bridges and working with our federal delegation to make a point about, from the Army Corps of Engineers, something has got to give there. We cannot have happen what we had happen this past fall, continue to happen year in and year out. We have to address, and I think the conversation needs to be escalated about replacing these 85-year-old bridges, and I think that that's something we all agree on. I think our federal delegation has agreed on and been working on as well, and hopefully collaboratively, and the administration has had conversations as well with the Army Corps of Engineers on that. So that's something that I would really love to see as a victory.
Thank you, Senator DiMacedo. And Representative Hunt, your quick list of what we'll see from you in the next couple of months.
Thank you. I want to thank Terry Duenas and the crack crew of technical gurus to be able to allow me to join this. I'm down in El Paso, Texas, because our oldest grandson's graduating from high school, and I did not want to miss this, so I thank you for that. I am the ranking member on the Healthcare Finance Committee, and we're going to be bringing out a bill this month that's going to do a lot about providing better access to medical treatment, and also a number of ideas to be able to clamp down on the cost of that. So I look forward to that. And then also, I just wanted to point out that in spite of the fact that Massachusetts has the lowest gun rate death in the country, one of the things that could still happen here is school violence. And the Senate has picked up on an outside section that I had filed in the House budget that didn't get in there, but fortunately, we have an angle on that, and this is to create a fund that would allow school districts to do a better job of securing their school buildings and to put more resources into getting SROs or school resource officers in place who do a great job of preventing the types of things that have happened all over the country, including in Parkland, Florida, from happening here. So thank you very much, Matt and everybody else, for allowing me to join you this session.
Thank you, Representative Hunt, and thank you again from myself personally to our entire Cape and Islands legislative delegation. It's an honor that you were able to come and join us here today, and all of our viewers who are watching us across Cape Cod. We're being viewed from Bourne out to Provincetown and also online at capecod.com. Thank you, as Representative Hunt said, to Terry Duenas and all of his staff here at the Cape Cod Community Media Center. They've done an amazing job again. Terry, thank you to you and your staff, and I'd like to thank my staff as well at Cape Cod Broadcasting Media, everybody in promotions and programming as well, and our owner, Gregory Bone, for supporting this program again this year, and all of you here in our live audience. We appreciate your time today here, and we hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for being with us here for Cape Cod Broadcasting's 3rd Annual State of the Cape. Have a great weekend.
I got to call you on your...